Megan Henry, and today I'm going to be talking about the research scientific article that I evaluated and looked over. So it's peer-reviewed, basically. It studied Irisin and the link that it has to metabolism and then exercise's effect on that. So we're going to get right into it. Basically, we have Irisin is a myokine. So this meaning that when you exercise, it's believed that when your muscle contracts, that this myokine is released into the blood. So this study hypothesized that the more exercise that somebody does, then the more irisin will be released into the blood. So one thing that this study did differently from other studies is that they actually evaluated based on different groups of participants. They had a diverse group of participants, each of which had a different kind of level of exercise, and this was something that was unique to it because other studies don't always include the level to which participants exercise. So previous studies have had mixed results. And this study would also, in addition, have mixed results. But the observational study that this was aimed basically just to still find the link between metabolism, exercise, and see if irisin levels will rise with that. So basically next, we're going to get into the methods, which, like I just said, the participant groups, we had 4 different groups of participants. So these different groups of participants included athletes or sedentary humans who were at different levels of vigorous activity or no activity. So the first group was highly specialized athletes. There were 20 of these. Basically, they were highly specialized athletes, meaning that they, on a national level, could compare to people who did their respective activity or sport. And then the local level athletes, this would mean that they probably had a minimum of 10 hours per week and about 4 days of exercise and activity. There was also 20 of them. Then we had the recreational physical activity, which would be a lot of people that we might see. This would include like around 2 to 3 days of activity, 3 hours per week. And there was also 20 of those. Now the sedentary group we only had 10 of, but that's just no physical activity, not even in habits, not even in day-to-day basis. So the variety of participants is really a big factor that we're looking in here. To start, they did an overnight fast and they did not exercise. So they fasted overnight, they didn't eat, and then they went to the lab at around 8 a.m. They had a catheter in, and then at around 8:30, they were taking blood samples. So this was checking other things that affect metabolism, such as lipid levels, cholesterol, blood glucose, and then of course irisin. And then they decided that the statistical significance would be if p-value was less than 0.05 or 5%. 0.5%. So next we got into the results. So initially the results appeared to be within normal limits for most things. Obviously we're going to have some increased values for people that are sitting and not doing activities, such as increased blood glucose and cholesterol. But there was nothing that was statistically significant against versus other categories of participants in terms of exercise. So then we actually looked at the resistance to insulin. So resistance to insulin is something that's very important because if your body is not letting insulin enter the cells, then your blood glucose is going to be higher. So if your blood glucose is going up, and that's typically if you don't exercise, so then we realize that insulin resistance actually has a lot to do with exercise, because if you're not exercising, then your blood glucose is going to go up because you become more resistant to insulin, and insulin's not able to open up your cells so that the glucose can go in. So it does affect irisin values. So that brings us to the next slide, which is actually very important. They ended up in this study taking into account an irisin correction. So this correction was for the degree of insulin resistance. So how they calculated insulin resistance, and then also the insulin over compared to that. So there was a high insulin resistance and increased blood glucose, like I said. And then the values were significantly different. So as you'll see here on this chart, the irisin originally, it wasn't that different between different groups that we see. It wasn't, obviously this is exercising how I said, group 1 the most activity, group 4 the least sedentary. And you see that there's not that big of a difference. It's not statistically significant. But then you look over here and you see the Irisin values are significantly higher in these first two groups as compared to the rest. And this is when the insulin resistance is taken into account. So that's very important to note. So then in a discussion, we look at other studies. We see that metabolic regulation involvement, like there's been shown, this study kind of like came and said, hey, listen, if you include insulin resistance, you will see that Irisin does have an effect on metabolic regulation, and specifically in lipids and glucose. And then it also was shown that there's a link between if you have more activity, then you're going to have lower insulin resistance. And this article was also written by a diabetes research. So if you think about that, then you think about how lower insulin resistance and diabetes, it's like one of the things that you can actually help if you have diabetes is more exercise, depending on which type you have, but that is a risk factor. So if you exercise more, it's saying you will have less insulin resistance and your blood glucose will be lower because it will be able to enter the cells. And now what this study is finding is that Irisin does play a role in that. But although there have been other results in other studies. So in conclusion, there's that possible link, glucose metabolism and lipid metabolism, like I said. And then we're shown by having a high value of Irisin in ratio in athletes. So if you have a high ratio of your Irisin and your insulin resistance, then that's kind of just showing just exactly what I've been talking about. Just people that exercise more have had a higher level, just like the last slide showed in this chart. So now the questions that I have developed would be, could the link between Irisin and insulin resistance play a role in diabetes? Which, like I've touched on, that I've speculated, nothing in the article really led to that link other than I noticed that it was written for diabetes research. It's just that I think that there could be a link there considering that insulin's involved and exercise. And then what other factors could affect Irisin levels in regards to increasing metabolism. So could there be other factors that also what you eat, does your diet, like other things that affect metabolism, not just only exercise. So could there be certain things that you eat, certain foods that could affect that? And then my last one was, does increase in Irisin levels and resulting metabolism affect weight loss? Now, whenever you talk about metabolism, you hear lots of people talk about weight fluctuations, weight loss, pounds on, pounds off. So I'm just wondering if there's a direct link between Irisin and weight loss. And that concludes my presentation for today. Thanks for watching.